I was given access to a BBC laptop.
Are there names of very high-profile people that are implicated in this in ways that would shock the world?
Yes.
Are there some that would truly shock people?
Yes. This man had immense power within the royal household. I've been followed, I've been spied on. If they kill me, they can't kill what I represent.
Why wasn't Savile caught while alive? What was the most damning thing?
The most damning thing was...
What has happened to you since you started pointing in the direction of people in Parliament and abuse?
Goodness me, I think that's what's known as a small question to a big answer. What has happened to me? Well, I have been subject to all manner of issues. I've been followed. I've been spied on by the Cabinet Office. They admitted in a subject access request quite recently that they have been spying on me, their so-called 77th unit, which is attached to the military. Wow. They have been spying on me since 2020, and that was admitted, as I say, in a SARS request. So it is incredibly difficult. I've lost jobs. I've been threatened. I've been stalked, I've been trolled, you name it. It all happens really, but you keep rising above it because my sense of injustice is so great that somehow once I sort of shake myself off and dust myself down, I'm like ready to get back in the ring again and start fighting because I think it's something worth fighting for. None of us know how long we're here for. So at least let us stand for something. You know, what was it that Malcolm X said? And, I'm going to paraphrase him really badly, but it was something like, stand for something or fall for anything. And that's really how I live my life.
What does it feel like to suddenly understand that you are under government surveillance? And did they give any kind of reason for why?
Yes. Well, it feels incredibly strange, but it's also reassuring in its own way because you no longer feel insane. All the things that you suspected, you were like, okay, so I wasn't being paranoid. That really did happen. And the reason that they don't really give reasons other than you kind of deduce the reason from what it is, the areas that they tell you that they're interested in what you're talking about. And a lot of mine was to do with the COVID issue and the fact that I was questioning the government narrative around COVID. And that was a real issue. And so I was being watched primarily by the disinformation unit. And I'm a journalist and I'm interested in facts and evidence. And so to actually be sort of targeted by a disinformation unit was a bit perturbing. But as I say, it was actually reassuring because, well, here's the thing. What kind of investigative journalist are you if the government aren't watching you?
Yeah, well, we're supposed to speak to power, aren't we?
Truth to power,
Truth
exactly.
To power.
So again, it was like, okay, so I'm on the right path here. So I think it's a mixed, complex set of emotions that I first experienced. I don't know if they're still watching me. I've yet to issue another SARS and discover that. I think there's other areas that they've been watching me as well. And I also think that there have been people who've been working behind the scenes who have gone to places of employment that have created problems for me. I was a consulting and contributing editor at ITN for 8 years. And my job primarily was to bring in stories that nobody else was talking about. So one of the very first stories that we broke through my work was the contaminated blood scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Nobody was talking about it when we started talking about it. And I'd happened upon it because I'd been approached by Glenn, who was running the contaminated blood scandal group. And they'd asked me to go to Whitney and David Cameron's constituency. This was when he was still Prime Minister. And they were having a meeting with him. Anyway, we all showed up and suddenly he said, I'm not having a meeting with these people. And when you're stood outside in the cold with people who are dying because they've got contaminated blood, so something else rises up in you. So I said to Glenn, what do you want to do? He said, we want to deliver all these leaflets to David Cameron. And I said, well, I know where he lives, so we're going to his house. This is all on YouTube. So we went to his house, his armed guards, huge guns. And I said, we're putting this through the door. They said, no, you're not. And I said, watch me. And they wouldn't take it. So we then pushed all these leaflets underneath the door of David Cameron's house. And months later, they announced the contaminated blood inquiry and people finally started to get compensated. So it is important to speak truth to power. And I do consider it a mark of the fact that I'm doing something of value, that they are watching me. So, win-win, I suppose.
Yeah. I guess they're also watching nutters.
Yes.
But you're a proper journalist. I think that's really
Yes.
important, because I think it's so hard, isn't it, when people start watching and listening to people, and is that a real person? And you are very much a real person. You made this fantastic documentary about politicians and the abuse within and these kinds of scandals. You're interviewing in that documentary very high up, prestigious, mainstream people. This is not.
Yes.
That's what I want to make very clear to people. When you say that there is abuse going on in Parliament and that kind of thing, this is not the same as some of the conspiracy theories maybe in America.
Not at all.
Yeah. So what have you found? I know there's a lot over the years. It's a very general question.
Oh, it's huge. I mean, first of all, it was absolutely wrong, in my opinion, and according to my research, that Lord Janner was allowed to die without being as thoroughly investigated as he should have been. There were 33 boys in care homes in Leicester who talked about the abuse. And again, I want to make it absolutely clear, being accused of a heinous crime such as that is horrendous, change your life around, and you may be entirely innocent. But the problem that I've discovered is that so many police have been prevented from actually carrying out proper investigations. And Mike Veal, for example, from Wiltshire Police, when he started to look into the allegations surrounding Sir Edward Heath, the weight of the establishment that came after him was extraordinary. Like the Times newspaper, there were editorials about him. Keith Faz, politician, he sort of, came after him. There were, there were various people who were saying this is absolutely wrong. You shouldn't be doing this. This was a former prime minister. But none of us should be above being questioned. Absolutely not. And you're absolutely right. I do interview people who are credible. And a perfect example of that is Colin Sutton. Colin Sutton is a former Metropolitan Police detective. And ITV have made several docudramas based on Colin Sutton. The first one was to do with Amélie de Lagrange and Millie Dowler on Levi Belfield, because Colin was the cop who eventually brought in Levi Belfield. Colin was also the cop who eventually caught the Night Stalker. The Night Stalker was the rapist who was raping elderly people in southeast London over a period, I think, of 17 years. And everybody was they didn't know what to do about it. And Colin came in. So Colin is the calibre of the people that I interview, because it's really important not to be dismissed as a conspiracy theorist when you're trying to raise awareness of situations like this. So Janner is one example. Edward Heath is another example. But there are so many, and one of the reasons.
Could I just say, for those who are not from Britain, because these are just names, aren't they? So
yes.
How can you give those people a feeling of what's going on?
Yes, okay. So Lord Janner, he was a Labour peer, and he was obviously a politician before. He was the politician for Braunston in Leicester. And over a period of many years, he was accused of abusing boys in the care homes that he visited in his constituency. And as I say, that amounted at the last count to 33. Now, that's a huge amount of people. And I've worked with survivors of child abuse, and some survivors are incredibly messed up, as you can imagine from their experience. But I've also encountered fantasists, so I allow for this. Because you have to, we've seen it, for example, with Carl Beach, a perfect example. Carl Beach, for those who don't know, became probably the most high profile to be accusing people in the so-called VIP abuse scandal. And Carl Beach was eventually found guilty not only of being a liar and a fantasist, but a child abuser himself. So you have to be incredibly careful. Now, what's interesting, Andrew, is I never believed him. Never believed him.
Why not?
It was the level of detail. The detail was extraordinary, you see, and that doesn't mean people can't remember detail, but there was just something that, and I do believe in gut instinct. Our solar plexus is so important, and I rely on it so heavily to tell me what is and isn't when I'm uncertain. And he had come out with these incredible stories that went across from senior army majors to politicians to minor royalty. And that didn't mean, that wasn't why I automatically said this man must be a liar or a fantasist. But it was some of the things that he said, which are just too gory for me to repeat here. But that was what made me question it. He claimed that he'd witnessed, a child being killed in front of him.
Yes.
All of this stuff. Now, again, that doesn't mean those things don't happen, because I do know, I've talked with people who have studied in such detail issues like Satanism. We've seen recently in Scotland these children, and there's convictions for this, all these adults, I think it was 8 adults, children were being put in ovens, right? Insane stuff that was happening in a Scottish inquiry. I'm not saying that the oven was on. I'm saying that, that they were doing these insane things to terrorise these children. I interviewed Dr. Joan Coleman. Now, many people may have heard of her, and if not, then I would highly recommend they Google her work. Joan is now dead. I was the last person to interview Joan, and I went to her home in the Surrey Hills. She was a psychiatrist in the 80s, and she was demonized on the back of the whole satanic panic stuff.
Yeah.
Joan had drawn up a list, and on this list included many famous people from all walks of life. And Joan had drawn up this list based on independent testimonies from her patients. She predominantly worked with young children who had been abused. And Joan had created this list, and she would not add a name to this list unless there were 2 independent patients who had said, this person was involved in my abuse, or witnessed it, or was involved in something which sounds satanic. Whether we want to give any life to Satanism or not, some of the behaviour is satanic. And so Joan was phenomenal. And what was really interesting is she was completely demonised, as I say, in the 80s and the 90s. But before her death, she started to get something of a revival. And her death was about 5 years ago. I could have that wrong. It's around that. And she started to get a revival where the things that she'd said were starting to become evident to lots of people. And that is the way with the work I do. Oftentimes, it's ahead of the curve because it needs to be, because I'm exploring that which nobody else is, or at least very few are. But absolutely what you say is I don't explore it in a conspiratorial manner. I go to the best sources I possibly can. You will not see me repeating something that I've heard third hand. If I go as much as I possibly can to the person who said it, and if not, somebody's witnessed.
Did you find that the abuse is systemic and protected within government in the UK?
Yes, sadly, yes. It was 2013. No, actually, it was October 2012 when Tom Watson stood in the House of Parliament and he said to David Cameron that he had been given intel that there had been a influential PR ring linked to Parliament and the Cabinet Office. And that was when everything kicked off. And this was following the Jimmy Savile revelations. And so everything kicked off. And after that, that was when the child abuse inquiry started. And that was when I really started to look into it more deeply. And I found it really interesting that we had one 70s entertainer after another being arrested, but absolutely nobody associated with the British establishment. And I found that curious.
Well, Savile was related to the British establishment. That was part of the problem, wasn't it?
It was part of the problem, but he was dead.
Yeah. That's true.
And that's the thing. So what you had were people like, the guy who did It's a Knockout, for example, and Rolf Harris, and all of these 70s entertainers.
Cliff Richard.
Yes. And
wrongly.
No, Cliff Richard was never charged, never convicted of anything.
He turned up in a helicopter.
And that in itself was extremely dodgy. Since when does the BBC know ahead of time and to be there when they're going to do a raid on somebody's house? So that in itself, I felt that was some sort of setup to, again, discredit the whole issue of VIP files. And again, let us be clear here. I'm not making any accusations about Cliff Richard. I'm just saying that I believe that the BBC have played a formidable role in discrediting the issues of VIP files. And I will use as an example Panorama, which they did, which was around VIP files, and they called it What's the Truth? And they actually used people from the internet who'd already been discredited. So they use discredited people to tell the story. Do you see what I'm saying? People who had no credibility, conspiracy theorists. And so it was very easy for a team like Panorama to run circles in these people and make them look like head cases who were just making stuff up. They never asked me to be interviewed. They should have asked me to be interviewed. I would have pointed them in all directions to get some evidence. But, so I've always had a problem with the BBC, and quite extensively so. It's not that long ago that we know MI5 was involved in choosing who should work at the BBC. They were forced to admit that. So who's to say that's not still going on to a certain degree? And what I will say is about 7 years ago, I was given access to a BBC laptop.
Oh, go on.
That was fascinating because that laptop captured all the minutes of meetings between BBC executives and government. And then I was able to see how in charge of things the government were in terms of the BBC. And that was just such an eye-opening moment for me in many respects. I was already well onto it anyway, but that was like it was like a final piece in the jigsaw. It's like, okay, so I really haven't been imagining this. Because when you see, you can hear many things, you can put together many pieces. But for me as a journalist, I really always need that one thing that is going to categorically show me something is right. And that laptop was it.
What was the most damning thing?
The most damning thing was, there were a few. I think the most damning thing was where the Cabinet Office was telling BBC directors to pull stories to do with austerity.
Oh.
And the breakdown of the NHS and to do with the welfare reform bill. This is when we were going through all of this experience. And I was very much involved in, and this is why the person had come to me, and they felt that they could trust me not to sensationalize it, but just to look at the information they were presenting to me as objectively as possible. And so it became absolutely clear to me that the Cabinet Office were vetoing news stories that impacted our nation, and that I felt was damning. Wow. And what was even more damning is none of the national newspapers would run with the story.
Right. But what about, that's different to abuse scandals, though.
Well, it's an abuse in its own way, isn't it? But you're absolutely right. It's not sexual abuse. It's sort of an abuse of our nation. And BBC is held in high esteem around the world. You talk to people around the world and they're like, oh yeah, BBC News, you can absolutely trust it. It is above and beyond anything. Well, actually, no, it's not. It's highly compromised. And that in itself, I felt was abusive because people religiously turn on to whatever, I never watch BBC now, but like News at 1 or whatever, News at 6, News at 10. They religiously do that around our nation and around the world. And they were being fed sanitized news that was benefiting the government. So that I felt was abusive. I'm not just focused on sexual abuse. I'm focused on any injustices that impact people. Somebody did a cartoon of me years ago, about 10 years ago, and I still use it. It's my actual YouTube meme, and it's me holding up a board which says people before profit, and that's who I am. That's what I'm about. I hate any form of injustice, and if I get a whiff of it, that is it. I'm very tenacious, and I'm a finisher. Once I start something, I will finish it.
I like people over ideology as well. That's what I've been saying.
Yeah, that's great. That's really great as well. Yeah, just people.
We forget the human, don't we?
We do forget the human, and we've seen that recently, haven't we? Well, we've seen a lot, I think, since COVID. And, there's lots of discussions that take place online which are so divisive, whether that is the trans debate or whether that's to do with COVID or whether that's to do with Israel and Palestine. And it's so incredibly divisive. And I actually had a discussion with an old journalist colleague of mine yesterday, and he said to me, sometimes I think it's really disrespectful how you question the words of reputable journalists. And I said, well, sometimes I think it's really disrespectful how you don't. And
he's questioning you.
Yeah, he's questioning me.
So you're not a reputable journalist then?
Yeah, well, no, but the thing is they want me to get in line because the greatest problem about somebody like me who's come from the mainstream, I spent 3 decades in the mainstream. I was a talking head on This Morning. I've done more debates on This Morning than practically any other journalist. I have discussed everything on This Morning, from childcare to what you name it.
Yeah.
I've been, for a very, very long time. And I got into a lot of trouble there to do with the Madeleine McCann story, which I'm also very happy
we can get onto that later. I've got a whole thing.
Yeah, great. So the problem is he would have less of a problem with me if I just came from the internet. But because I come from the same world as him, the very fact that I exist and I'm questioning things sort of holds a spotlight on those who aren't, those who are just going along with the narrative.
The cult.
And we have to be realistic. Our media is bored. I only talk about what I know. So I don't know about sort of Eastern media or anything like that, but I do know about Western media. And Western media is largely owned by billionaires with agendas. And that is the reality. And they employ paid liars and propagandists. And so when I talk like that, it really upsets people who I've worked with, because they're like, is she talking about us? And I did point out to him, listen, me and you are still cool. I know that you've got your responsibilities, and I don't have an issue with that. He's not a liar, but he does keep his head down. Whereas I wasn't born to keep my head down.
Yeah. Well, good. That's why you're outside that mainstream media now.
Exactly.
It's such bollocks as well, the whole thing. I mean, I've officially now stopped watching Have I Got News For You. I used to enjoy it even if I disagreed with the politics. And the final straw was the other day, Ian Hislop, and I know non-Brits won't know who this is, but it's a topical news show. It said something about Piers Morgan, and it was just like, and criticise Piers all you want, but he said, well, no one would watch it anyway, not that anyone's watching Piers. Piers Morgan gets millions and millions of views, and Have I Got News For You gets several thousand, I think. And just the lack of understanding of what's going on outside of their bubble just made me go, you know what, I can't watch this anymore.
Massive. I will say, though, the Piers Morgan story, that's an interesting one in terms of views, because do you remember when he first went to Talk TV when they launched? And incidentally, I was part of a pilot for Talk TV. It was, can you imagine making a pilot with Vanessa Feltz, Rachel Johnson and Jeremy Kyle? Okay, and I clashed with every one of them. It was hilarious.
So you should.
So I absolutely should. And
was Tessa Dunlop there as well?
No.
She's a friend of mine, Tessa.
No, I'm not really overly familiar with Tessa. I mean, I know who she is.
She gets into some
Right.
heated arguments.
Does she?
Yeah.
Well, I think it's good to. I don't deliberately set out to antagonise anybody, but just my very presence of what I stand for can antagonise people. So, but Piers Morgan is interesting because in the first, there are times when he actually doesn't exceed anything beyond like 30k views.
Okay, yeah.
Where he gets the big views is when he brings in the big names, the Andrew Tates, the Trumps. That's when he can get millions. And that actually, if he was able to just keep that up, he'd be fine. But on average weeknight, sometimes...
Even now, or was this a while back? Because I think now, the last few months in particular.
Yeah, I think because he's had more time. But no, this was a while back. And so what happened at the beginning, they actually were talking, and they said this publicly, they were going to put him on garden leave because his views were so low. And this was reported, I think, in Media Guardian. So, this was sort of acknowledged. But Ian Hislop, I mean, what can I say?
What?
Well, he's part of the establishment, isn't he? How long has he been in that seat?
A long time in that seat, and just it's a shame because I like him. He's quite religious, I didn't expect that.
Is he?
Yeah, but Church of England.
Really?
Yeah, really into.
I met a lot of hypocrites who claim to be religious.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, but I'm not a fan of Piers Morgan, I should say. Absolutely not.
And you don't have to be.
No.
But he's, he's a wind-up merchant. He's a wind-up merchant, I think. And that's fine. Back to the abuse, and I will get out of that eventually, but it's just such a fascinating... I was watching that documentary and you made it so beautifully, and we'll put a link below so people can watch it. Why wasn't Savile caught while alive?
The $1 million question. I have every reason to believe, and indeed so do other excellent researchers that I've come to trust over the way, is because he was a procurer. His job was to procure children for members of the British establishment. And there is some clips available online still which will point you in that direction. And one is, and actually I use it in the documentary, it's from an old Parkinson interview. And
as a talk show host.
Yes. Parky, for anybody who doesn't know, was the sort of blueprint of talk shows when I was growing up. That was
Letterman.
Yes, exactly. Yes, exactly. And And I used to also love like World in Action and the Cook Report in terms of investigative journalism. But I believe the reason that Jimmy Savile wasn't caught was, as I say, because he was a procurer for members of the British establishment. And so the clip, which I think is absolutely brilliant, because Jimmy Savile was extremely boastful. He couldn't help himself and he loved name dropping. And so what he started to tell Michael Parkinson this incredible story about how he had just rocked up at Buckingham Palace with a child, and he managed to just go straight past the security. Who can just, it's like knocking on somebody's door and going into Buckingham Palace like that. So that already tells you immediately that this man had immense power within the royal household. Yeah. So he turned up with this girl, and he went to the bowroom. And I don't know if you've ever been in Buckingham Palace.
Not recent, not in the last 35 years.
Right, okay, fair enough, which is your age, presumably.
Yeah,
got you.
I got it wrong, I'm 34.
The bowroom is one of the main rooms for when they have their grand occasions. And he talks about how he went to the bowroom and Prince Phillip was there. And he said to Prince Phillip how he brought this girl. And Prince Phillip said to Savile, nod. And Savile said, he gave me the nod and said, put the kid away. And at the moment that Savile says that to Michael Parkinson, he looks down and he starts to mumble his words because he realises he's gone too far. And I think that's very interesting. And also, don't forget, Jimmy Savile was absolutely in tight with politicians, including Margaret Thatcher. Now, Margaret Thatcher, he spent, that we know of, at least 10 Christmases at Chequers, right? So this is somebody who was extremely influential. Margaret Thatcher was, in my experience, in my understanding, according to all my evidence, a protector of child abusers who surrounded her, including Jimmy Savile. She was told about Sir Peter Morrison, who was her private secretary, that he was having parties at weekends at home in Cheshire with young boys. And I interviewed the cops who were her private protection police and actually who told her. I interviewed one man who was there when her own private protection officer told her about Sir Peter Morrison. What did she do? She made him a sir. So I think it's very interesting. I think the reason that Savile escaped justice, and bear in mind, there were police forces all around the UK who had reports of Savile. But every Friday morning, he also had his breakfast club with police. I don't know if you're familiar with that. So if you have the police in your pocket like that, okay? And again, I've worked with great police. I've interviewed great police. I have them in my documentaries. There are great police out there. And it's such a pity that some really awful, rubbish ones have discredited the important work they do, because we need the police. I'm not a defund the police person.
Yeah, I understand that.
Right.
There's individuals, aren't there?
Exactly.
What Savile did is if it wasn't so disgusting, it would almost be admirable.
I know.
The way he got the police, the royals, the politicians, all on his side to protect him. What do you think goes through, and we can only speculate, someone like Margaret Thatcher's mind when she's... Is it she just doesn't care that much? It's not a priority for her, abuse like that?
I always found that difficult to believe. I felt that she was compromised by the... I don't believe, as awful and hateful at times as I felt that Margaret Thatcher was, and I was certainly no fan, I don't believe that she was a psychopath. I don't believe that. And so I believe that this was about self-protection. We've seen members of her cabinet who have talked now, and again, historically, there's video footage online and actually in my documentary of, people saying, well, it was my job to, when cabinet members came to me and told me their stories, which usually involved young boys, it was my job to make sure that those stories went away. And that was... They see it as for the good of the party, for the good of the nation. Yes, absolutely. So I don't think this is going to sound insane. I don't even think it's personal. I think it is really about the good of the party, the good of the nation. Whatever it's for the good of, it's bad. And we have to penetrate it and we have to expose it. And so I think he was protected to protect everybody else who was involved.
Because if Savile had been found out while alive, it's not just Savile that would have been in trouble. I mean,
think about his relationships. He had a close relationship with Prince Charles, now King Charles, Diana, the Queen Mother. I mean, this is to our knowledge, somebody who presented a TV show and was a Northern DJ. Why did the Queen bring him in to mediate between Charles and Diana when their marriage was on the rocks? Why was Savile sent to Israel to talk? This is a Northern DJ. Can somebody explain to me? So this is somebody who had inordinate power. And let me tell you this, even as a child, I was uncomfortable with Savile.
And a lot of people say that. I mean, I was too young. I didn't even, except I saw him go into the Big Brother house and went, who the hell is this creepy guy? I didn't know who he was at the time. Obviously, my parents and everyone else older people than me knew who he was, exactly who he was. So bizarre. Did the royals, you just mentioned all these people he was in with from the royal family, did they know?
I mean, how do I know? Do you know, I find it hard to believe that they didn't, because when you're a royal or when you're a prime minister, the degree of protection around you and secret services that are finding out about the people that you're associating with, I find it impossible to believe that the royals didn't know. I find that impossible to believe. And, I would really, I don't like having to deal with any legalities that accompany my work. But there are some situations that I would be more than happy to stand up in a court of law and be cross-examined over. And the fact that I believe the royals knew about Jimmy Savile is one of them. I would welcome that. Wow.
Well, let's see if that happens at some point. Maybe this video will bring that about.
I hope so.
Bloody hell. It does beg a belief, and that's why I was asking that question about Thatcher before, because I'm just so curious about the human mind and what goes on because so many people, I imagine most people watching and listening to this are thinking, if I found out about something like that, I would go straight to the police, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And time again, it doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. There were also a lot of rumours about her husband as well, actually to do with the school in North London.
Thatcher's husband.
Yes, Dennis Thatcher. To do with the school in North London. And in fact, I've been approached by, and we are obviously sitting in North London at this moment in time, and I've been approached by several pupils from that school and Dennis Thatcher went regularly to that school, and I've been approached by several former pupils who swear up and down that he was involved in abuse.
Oh my God.
And I can say that because he's dead and he can't sue me for that. And actually, again, I don't know the truth. But I'm just on this occasion, I think it's safe enough to throw it out there as another potential, because Margaret Thatcher seemed not to have a problem to be around pedophiles.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, look, they're everywhere. I mean, there are supposedly in the male population, one out of every 100.
Right.
It's the same as psychopaths.
Yes.
I'd imagine that is higher at the top with both psychopaths and pedophiles, because they find their way to the top the way Savile did. Still, you're still talking 2 or 3% then. You're still, most, and that's what you were saying earlier, not to suspect everybody, not to go into conspiracy theories.
We have to be careful.
It's still 97 out of 100 who are not. And even that 1 or 2 out of 100 don't necessarily actually offend or anything like that.
Yeah.
But if you look at the 8 billion population, 4 billion men, that's a huge 1%.
Yes.
So
it is. It's significant. And I also interviewed, members from the Secret Services as well for my film. And what they had to say was really interesting. They actually said that child abuse was one of the best currencies that they had against ministers to use. But there would be footage that would be taken and used as forms of blackmail. And I want to make absolutely clear here, I made that film not because I believed everybody in it was a paedophile, but because I was so upset that there had existed these allegations for 4 decades and nobody was doing anything about it. And I felt it needed all to be pulled together and for us to examine it and to look at it. And again, I don't ultimately know about people, and I make no allegations against anybody and unless I had absolute proof.
Have you ever noticed that I never ask people to subscribe? That's partly because I thought subscribing doesn't matter. You get shown the videos again even if you don't subscribe. However, I just watched a video with the guy who designs the YouTube algorithm, and it turns out that they do actually promote videos more when a channel has more new subscribers. Then I checked my ratio of subscribers and found it pitifully low. Just 18% of my watch time actually comes from people who are subscribed to the channel. If you like this stuff and want to watch more, hit subscribe. Go to that little bell notification as well to get notifications, because that's also low on my channel because I never ask people to do it. Hitting like and subscribe is a free way to basically tip me. It helps the channel to grow, and it means I can afford more of these big productions.
All I'm saying is what is known from an evidential perspective or what is already out there. So, but again, who has ever been arrested? And so Eric Joyce is one of the only members of Parliament who has ever been convicted to do with child abuse. And Eric Joyce was convicted over the last couple of years for downloading Category A material, which he had watched over a period of years. And this featured children as young as a matter of months up to the age of 7. Now, Category A is the very worst that you can possibly get. So you can only imagine what was being done to these children. But so he's one of the very few members of Parliament who's actually been convicted to do with issues of child abuse. And I want to be absolutely clear here. I make no distinction between people who film child abuse and people who watch it. The courts do not imprison people who watch child abuse as a general rule.
Oh, you're kidding.
No. And the reason that they don't is because they don't see them as child abusers.
That's insane. That's insane. Without them, it doesn't happen.
Well, exactly, because they're the market.
You know, I remember having a chat with Chris Atkins. You know him, the journalist,
yes.
Documentary maker, and he went to prison. Rightly so, because he did some sort of tax scam. But, you know, he didn't really know what he was doing, I think, and he had an accountant and whatever happened. Went to prison for like 2-3 years for that. And, you know, okay, he did a wrong thing, but he talks about how those people would come in who have committed those kinds of crimes, not just watching, but being involved, and they'd be out in a few months. He'd watch them come and go.
Yeah.
And he's sitting there thinking, I did a tax scam, okay, you know, what am I doing in here?
Yeah.
You guys are out.
Yeah, Eric Joyce was never imprisoned. I mean, you will find, and anybody is absolutely welcome to search this, the vast majority of people who are convicted of downloading child abuse images. And there was one man in Swindon who downloaded 4 million child abuse images and not imprisoned. How can this be? I mean, it just beggars belief. And the judiciary routinely say, well, these people haven't convicted the act. They've just watched it. But as you rightly say, they facilitated it. They are the market. So I believe they're all culpable. Those who harm the children, those who film the children, those who watch the children.
Yeah. Is this now being procured? Are videos like this? Are children being procured for people in government, in Parliament?
I mean, even actually thinking about this story really upsets me. I was contacted by... they're adults now, but they were children at the time, and they come from what would probably be known as high society. They were born and raised in Richmond upon Thames, which actually is where I live, but I'm far from high society. But, you know... Lovely, though. It's beautiful, and we're talking multi-million houses there, pound houses there.
I must come round for tea.
I live in Teddington. You'll be very welcome. The former capital of TV Centre and various other... Well, ITV. These children were... part of the establishment, part of great wealth. Their parents were extremely wealthy. They had Saturday clubs where these children were taken to halls and they were filmed being abused. This
actually happened?
Yeah, this actually happened.
Why? See, you always imagine it being people not from high society. And this is completely stereotyped and unfair of me to. But you imagine
we've
people
been fed that image
because you imagine maybe the parents need the money or something like that. No. Why high society? Why would they let this happen to their kids?
Well, this is a very deep subject you're going into here. Yeah. A lot of those people will have been abused themselves in their public and private schools. They've grown up being abused. You know, the problem about abuse, especially child abuse, is that people do experience a form of arrested development. And sometimes what happens is when somebody, say, was abused at the age of 7, they retain, that is how they then later in life get their own kicks. It's so deep.
Their own kids?
Their own kicks.
No, but by doing it to their own kids.
Well, some people... won't necessarily do it to their own kids, but they'll do it to their friends' kids because it's like an agreement. They'll shuffle off, and that's what happened with these 2 children. So, but it was, being done on an industrial scale. It was a regular event at the weekends. And so it's absolutely, child abuse is absolutely nothing to do with money, except in, you know, even poverty-stricken, and I was born into poverty. When I say I was born into poverty, we were lucky if we had a meal a day. So we really, as a school child, I really relied on free school meals. And that is nothing bad to say about my mum. She had 4 of us and her husband with my brothers and sisters had died of cancer, and then she met my father and had me, and he'd gone. And so my mum, who was also very, very sick, she was struggling and it was really impoverished. But nobody was farming me out. Do you see what I'm saying? It's like, so even poverty, I find hard to justify why people, but you're absolutely right. It will happen in parts of the world, like in Mexico, and where there is such great, incredible poverty, pockets of India, et cetera, where it is seen as perfectly acceptable to traffic children. But ultimately, child abuse is nothing to do with poverty and everything to do with, well, perversion.
It's so sad to hear.
Extraordinary.
And this is it. Nobody wants to talk about it.
No.
I was telling you before we started speaking, I did this whole, in Germany, I went for a couple of years to look into not the acts, very different, but the condition or the illness or whatever it is that causes this percentage of men to have that inclination or whatever it is. But again, I'm hoping that's going to come out as a second or third book. I've got a book coming out soon. It's going to be the next one. One of the chapters.
You're really productive.
It's all happening.
It's fantastic.
I got a book about the psychology of secrets out in April.
Wow.
It's happening. And a lot of it's cults and things like that. But there's one chapter called The Worst Secret in the World. And that is about a 25-year-old woman who has that inclination or whatever it is. And I go to meet her in a village in Germany. And it might be able to be a full book. But the point is, a couple of years ago when I first started pitching just that as the full book, like my agent said that he had never in his career had such bad responses from publishers.
Wow.
Because he said this has never happened. They got back and said that they didn't even read. They were like, I'm not even reading this. So yeah, they didn't even want to look at it. And I just thought, how are we going to deal with a society that currently has, the statistics vary, but 1 in 4, 1 in 6, 1 in 9, I don't know, girls are abused. And we're just going to go, not talk about it.
I know.
People on the left say, don't talk about it, it triggers me. People on the right say, let's kill them all. Kill all the readers, like as if that's actually something we can do.
Yeah.
And nobody in the middle just, well, wash my hands of it.
Yeah.
This is something we've got to do, which is why I appreciate so much what you do, calling out these abuses.
Thank you. And also, you've just prompted me to think about something else, and that is, we don't associate women with child abuse. And we forget about the sheer volume of young boys who are being abused as well. So we focus on men abusing girls. And whereas I look at the whole picture, because I've interviewed boys who were in care homes who were put on sunshine coaches in the 70s and driven up to London, where they were dressed up as fairies and paraded in front of men who then abused them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's like the Savile stuff. That's bits, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot of that is associated to do with Elm Guest House in southwest London, again in Richmond, where they had their Sunday nightclubs. And that was where Cyril Smith was. Cyril Smith was a member of Parliament who, again, eventually was found to be an extensive child abuser, and again allowed to die before it, and it's just horrendous. But yeah, Elm Guest House is absolutely infamous. But you know what happens? I always say to people, you don't need to fabricate the story beyond what it is. It's already outrageous enough. So people started to, and that's what I go back to what I said about BBC and Panorama. They were interviewing people to do with the Elm Guest House, and the stories they were coming out with were simply not true. The true story is bad enough. We really don't need to sensationalize this stuff. It's already horrendous enough. And the moment that they sensationalize it, of course, then it becomes discredited. You can discredit it easily. And that's what they did. That's what happened with the whole VIP scandal.
You know, what's really insidious is how it's often hidden behind sort of righteous causes. Obviously, Savile's a prime example of that. That's another book I want to write, by the way, is like nice people, or seemingly nice people. I mean, Savile with the charity.
Well, that's how they get away with it.
Kincora Boys Home, the Green Party, I think, in Ireland was heavily implicated.
Yes.
In Germany, in Berlin, do you know about the Kentler experiment?
No.
In the 80s. Again, the Green Party there, very heavy. They've never fully recovered. But basically, they realised they had two big problems. One was too many homeless boys, and one was too many pedophiles that they didn't know what to do with at the time. Oh. So they housed the...
This is sounding awful.
Yeah,
already.
They housed... It sounds like something out of Brass Eye, which is a British satirical show. They housed the boys with the pedophiles as a sort of experiment. And obviously, it went horrifically. And those boys can hardly talk now.
I have heard about this. This is absolutely horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And Kincora is a perfect example. And again, I interview credible sources, and I interviewed Colin Wallace, who was the original whistleblower to do with Kincora.
That's the Irish Boys' Home, and I'm talking to Andrew Lowney, who you know as well,
Yes,
of course, about
absolutely.
Mountbatten, the royal.
Mountbatten.
Oh.
You know, so there's a lot going on there. And again, I do think that a lot of it is to do with probably the abuse that they suffered in the system that they were put through as well. And it was entirely normalised. And that is not to justify it in any way at all, just to say that was the life that they understood.
Are there names of very high-profile people that are implicated in this in ways that would shock the world that are going through your mind right now that you can't say?
Yes.
I'm trying to read your mind. Are there some that would truly shock people?
Yes.
What would happen to you and to me if you were to reveal those names?
Well, I would be sued from here to kingdom come. I'd probably have a hit put out on my life. You almost certainly would. This is the child abuse in the British establishment, in any establishment. The British establishment has particular prominence all over the world. Oh, is there a royal family like our royal family all over the world? And so it is not just, again, it's not about protecting the individual. It is about protecting the crown. It is about protecting the establishment. And so they will, the firm, so they will take down anybody who gets in the way of that. I've always said, and I'm probably crazy to say this, but I would absolutely prefer to die in a hail of bullets on my knees than just to stop doing what I'm doing. Because if they kill me, they can't kill what I represent. That will live on forever.
You say that, but I'm not being flippant. I am a bit. But if they came and there was people with guns now,
Yeah.
wouldn't you then say like, all right, I'll stop talking about it?
No.
Come on.
No, I probably wouldn't. I mean,
on.
I come from really funny stock. My mum was a medium, and my mum died when I was 11 years old. And what she taught me, I used to sit around seance tables with her. Okay, I witnessed all manner of insane things. So I believe that this is so temporary here. I believe I've already, in many respects, served my purpose. My daughter is 26. I've raised her. She's doing brilliantly. I'm incredibly proud of my daughter. And she's a phenomenal force in her own right. And so I'm not scared.
You're ready.
I literally feel I've already reached a point where I stand for something that is so powerful that if they kill me, they'll make it even more powerful. So that in its own right is a protection.
Would you feel that way if you didn't believe in an afterlife, do you think?
No, I probably wouldn't.
Then you'd be like, okay, I want to stand for something, but
Yeah.
I quite want to, don't shoot me.
You have to think about some of the things that I've already been prepared to do. I faced off with David Cameron's armed guards down a country lane. They could have taken me out there and then.
Bloody hell.
Right?
What was
And
that?
this was for several occasions. Well, one was to do with the contaminated blood scandal, but on the other occasion, the first time ever that I went to David Cameron's house was because a man was camping outside. It was New Year's Eve, and his child had been taken away from him in what was known as a sort of forced adoption situation. So he was on a hunger strike. So we went down to support him on New Year's Eve, and David Cameron's guards told us that we had to leave, can't hang around here. And this was a deserted country lane. And I was in their faces. So that will give you some indication. I fell off of a table when I was a child, and I'm absolutely convinced that it snapped the neurons which sort of link me to being scared. So I'm just not scared.
That could be like don't take this in the wrong way.
No,
That could be
yeah.
psychopath spectrum.
Yeah,
You could be a good psychopath.
entirely possible.
Do you think you might be a psychopath?
Well, no, I don't actually think I'm a psychopath to be, because goodness knows what this clip will be.
How would you
used for.
feel if you saw a cat getting its head squashed?
I'd be absolutely horrified. I'm really compassionate.
Well,
I'd
you're not-
cry
you're
at the
not a
drop of a hat.
That's boring. Boring, you're not a
Yeah, I'm
psychopath.
really, really sorry. I'm incredibly, and that's the other thing. I'm tough, but I'm soft.
Okay.
So I know I'm not a psychopath, but I'm just not scared. I'm just literally
That's
not
amazing.
scared.
I envy that. I'm desperately scared of everything.
Are you?
Anxious and scared. Everything's stress. Don't get me wrong. I'm what was it? Fun foot forward. Go getter. Obviously, to do this stuff, you have to be, don't you? But scared. Was scared of death and those things. If they came with guns and said, "Listen, don't want you talking about the royals anymore," I think I'd have to stop.
Would you?
I don't want guns in my head.
Yeah, I mean, most regular people, most normal people wouldn't. But I've been on this road. I've seen so much that I'm not religious and I'm not looking for any sort of martyrdom or anything, but I almost feel it would be a martyr situation. Because here's the thing. I've spoken about so much that even if I were to die in completely regular circumstances, being knocked over by a car, the people are going to say that I've been taken out anyway.
Yeah. I just don't want everything to go black forever and to not have be alive. I love being alive.
Yeah, well, I love being alive, but I also can't wait to get to that other part as well. I think that's really exciting.
I wish I believed.
I've watched people die, and I think sometimes it's, in the right circumstance, I've sat by the bedsides, and I think it's some of the most peaceful moments ever, which is why I really oppose drugs at death. Unless to reduce pain, because I don't want to see anybody in pain. But that life-death crossover is, I actually feel shivery, and I feel the hairs on my arm standing up, is one of the most spiritual moments, I think, that we are ever likely to experience, that transition. So I have no issues with it. And again, I think it is my background.
I'm so envious. of that. And that actually sounds patronising. I didn't mean it.
No.
I spoke to David Baddiel about this because he's an atheist. And we both talked about being atheists who don't want to be. We're reluctant atheists because there are others who are they've got a lot of bravado about it. Ricky Gervais and people, what do I care? I was dead before I was born. I'll be dead again, like that. And then there are some like us who are like, I wish I could believe. I think whatever happened to you with fear got knocked out of you. I think spirituality got knocked out of me. I just don't have that bone. And I regret it. I think I miss out on a lot of stuff, but I can't make myself.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, I can't make myself.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, I literally think, it sounds ever so cliche, but I sort of feel that I'm in this world, but not of it.
I can see that.
I feel very much like that a lot of the time. And so I feel that there's like a ring of protection around me. Crazy things happen to me. Crazy things happen to me. I used to be a music journalist, and my speciality was hip hop. I was writing about black music when people didn't want when black people didn't want white people to be writing about black music. And the British chapter, the 5% Nation, put out a hit on me. Christ. Right? So, and they ended up beating up one of my black male friends on top of a bus, at the top deck of a bus in Brixton, saying to him, "You tell her, back off." So I've had this for a long time. I actually feel this is part of my purpose. I've had all manner of spiritualists and people and past life people do, and people are absolutely convinced that my role in the people of that persuasion, that my role is to be persecuted, but to raise awareness. And so I see that as it's all part of it. So it really isn't bravado. If people came storming in here with guns, I'd be like, let's do this. I actually feel I would.
You're a heretic.
That's why I'm here.
You're right for the show, I'll tell you that.
That's exactly why I'm here.
In your documentary, by the way, I remember we've spoken about David Cameron, of course, the former Prime Minister. There is this scene and I remember at the time when Phillip Schofield on GB News starts showing him a list of suspected, is it politicians?
Yes.
Yeah, and Cameron doesn't want to know about it.
Yes.
What's going on?
Yeah, so that was this morning, and I worked extensively with both Holly and Phil. On this morning. And so what happened was Phillip had taken a list off the internet from conspiracy sites and presented it to David Cameron. Now, that in itself is a very iffy scenario, because that predominantly is around Lord Alistair McAlpine. That was what triggered all of that off. And
okay, who's he?
Lord Alistair McAlpine was one of Margaret Thatcher's close allies. He was Conservative Party chairman at some stage. Certainly he was very high in the Conservative Party. He was an alleged pedophile. And around that period of time when it was all kicking off, it was Alistair who sued. His lawyers actually put out a message on Twitter saying anybody who said that they were going to sue him. That was one of the first sort of major takedowns of social media that I've ever witnessed. But there was a whole series of events. ITV, I think, ended up paying, I think it was £127,000, something phenomenal. And you couldn't even see his name on that list that was being handed over. But what it did again was it shut down. It made the media was like, gung-ho, let's go after them, let's get them. In the most irresponsible way imaginable. there was a Newsnight special which featured Stephen Measham, who was a young boy who had been in a North Wales care home. And again, he was said to have said it was Alistair McAlpine, who they didn't mention anybody in Newsnight. But again, people were on Twitter, including John Bercow, who used to be the Speaker of the House.
Yes.
His wife had done this, and that was what set off the whole Twitter alarm when it was still Twitter. She'd done this thing saying, why is Alistair McAlpine trending, something like smiley face or something like that, and they sued her for that. And that sent, and I thought, wait, and all of this was what fueled me to do paedophiles in Parliament. And I was like, this is really weird, because like the media aren't really doing anything, and yet it's sending this massive warning to everybody to shut up, not say anything. And I
by
just,
being stupid about it and then getting sued.
Exactly. And also what was wrong there was the Phillip Schofield list to David Cameron. David Cameron started going on about, we can't have a gay witch hunt, and it was the conflation of homosexuality with being a child abuser. Now that is as old and hackneyed a stereotype as you're likely to get, and it's utterly repugnant, and the two should never be in the same conversation.
Is it possible that he was actually making a fairly progressive point in that case, that he was concerned that there were homophobic people who were inventing things against gay people?
Right, I allow for that, because I've worked extensively with lesbians and gays, and for years I've done all the Pride marches. When I still liked Pride, but yes, that is possible, and I don't rule it out. And we also know there was an awful lot of politicians who felt unable to show their true nature because of homophobia.
Well, Philip Schofield himself, was asking the question.
Absolutely. So all of that was plausible.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But what that enabled was other politicians to suddenly go, they're coming after me because this is part of a gay witch hunt. And so I don't like anything like that enables that. It's like, you're absolutely right. There is a thread of truth there, and we should observe that. But it isn't all. It isn't everything. And we have to be careful.
Schofield himself, was also doing dodgy things himself. Not quite the same, is it? I don't know how serious it was.
No.
But I've criticised him quite heavily without thinking now he has to go to prison forever, and be gone forever.
That was more of an abuse of power than anything.
It depends who you believe, doesn't it? Because I was always hearing that the kid was very young when he met him.
Yes.
I don't know, like 11 or 12.
Well, there was a picture of them when the boy was young.
But how? Because Schofield, I think, says they met when they were 15 or 16.
Yeah.
Because I'd heard 11 or 2. So,
Yeah.
and I might have just heard nonsense. But then also Schofield said nothing happened until they were 18, which later changed to 21. I think there's two accounts.
But he's already been proven to be a liar. So how can we trust him?
So that's the issue. If he's telling the truth, it's more just of a power issue.
Yes.
But if he's not, it's a legal issue without it necessarily being a pedophilia issue. Because that's just another topic, isn't it? But pedophilia versus haemophilia.
Yes. Yes.
There are people who have an interest in prepubescent children,
Right.
And there are other people like I believe J.D. Salinger was a famous one who are interested in sort of 12 to 15 just after puberty or whatever it might be.
Yes.
And if Schofield was doing whatever he was doing with a 16 or 17-year-old, that's not the same as these politicians, but it's still very wrong.
Yes, I think it's all wrong. Abuse of power, I remember seeing around this morning, I found it extraordinary that this intern had access everywhere.
Yeah.
Truth is, we don't know the truth, because this is a man who lied for decades about his sexuality. The whole coming out, sat next to Holly Willoughby, was horrendous.
Kevin Spacey defense.
Why do you think that happened, though? Why do you think that happened?
What, that he came out?
Yes.
Because he had to sort of make it into a victim story, like I'm coming out despite homophobia and things, to hide that he knew what was coming out, which was that he had groomed a young child.
Right, that's right. That is why Philip Schofield came out. Holly Willoughby, all of that was farce, an absolute farce. One of the funniest things around it was when it was being discussed on, I think, Good Morning Britain, and Joan Collins turned around and said, He's come out. Didn't everybody know he was gay? Because people inside know.
Yeah.
You know, people inside know.
People inside knew about Savile.
Yes. Yes, it was a huge topic, apparently.
Louis Theroux knew.
Green rooms. Well, now that is another interesting topic, isn't it?
Okay, so you tell me then, because from what I've seen, is that Louis sort of knew, but didn't know enough to really push Savile. But when he did push Savile, he said, "Oh, do you mean about those rumours about the is he, isn't he a paedophile?" So he knew enough to know there were rumours, because again, I was too young for any of this. So now I know, okay, there were actually rumours everywhere, to such an extent that it wasn't mad for Louis to ask that to Jimmy, with Jimmy saying, "What?"
Exactly.
So it must have really been out there more than people remember.
Esther Ranson says so, doesn't she? She says it was always a topic of well, not always, but it was a topic of conversation in green rooms. There were producers who were told, don't allow children near him. You know, this went on. I didn't know any of this. You see, the thing is, even though I've worked in there, I was never an insider because I couldn't be trusted. Couldn't be trusted to keep those sorts of secrets. I was a useful insider. I was the token radical in any situation that I was in. They allowed me in because it gave the appearance of some sort of balance taking place. But that was the only reason I was there. But really, I was an outsider for many, many years, and happily so. But yeah, to our understanding, all these things were open secrets.
What do you make of the Theroux scene?
I have many questions about Louis Theroux. Many questions indeed. Have you ever seen when he did the Hamiltons?
Yes.
Which
was again for non-Brits.
Oh, sorry.
Two politicians who were married, and he went and stayed with them.
Yes, and it was quite phenomenal that while he was filming them, this incredible story came out, a sexual story where they were apparently involved with. Yes, really, it all happened all on camera. And Louis Theroux is an insider. This is not to say that his actions are criminal or that he was aware of anything that should be reported, but Louis Theroux would have known a great deal more than somebody like me. And that is also why a Louis Theroux is given huge platforms.
Yeah. It is something that's difficult, because on the one hand, I got into this because of, as so many others did, people like me, sort of dopey, white, middle-classy guys. We see, oh, there's Louis, I can be like that.
Very good at what he does.
Very good at what he does. And I don't want to criticise too much, just from a personal point of view, because I'd like to work with him one day. I spoke with his wife and tried to get something going, and it didn't quite, not with his wife like that, but she works at Mindhouse production company with him. And they're great and fine and everything. But it is frustrating. I went through a whole period. I made a film about an exorcist for BBC, and it was like a Louis Theroux kind of thing. And it took 2 years for us to get BBC to watch it. They eventually bought it, didn't pay us any money. They paid us £6,000, but then they made us make changes that cost more than that. So we lost a few thousand making it, basically. When we said, hang on, but other people are getting millions and things like that, they were like, look, take it or leave it. And I even said, but I thought you were about bringing up the new people, the new talent. I was young, and we made the whole film ourselves. Me and my friend David, and they were just like, well, take it or leave it, that's what you're getting. They put it out, it got best of 2018, it was on their list, it won festival awards, all of that.
Wow.
And then I tried after that, because The Exorcist tried to kill me, it put me in a room and sort of locked me there and stuff, so then we got that camera. But anyway, we tried to make the next films.
You're really not as straight as you think you are, you know.
Well, I guess I'm the sort of the straight foil to the mad stuff going around. I don't know. And
Conductor.
Yeah, symbol of the madness all around. And so afterwards, I sat in production meeting after production meeting, sometimes with the BBC themselves, sometimes with production companies who were trying to sell to the BBC. And every single one of them, 100% of them, like about maybe 100 different production companies, said halfway through or towards the end, of course, you will have to be behind the screen because you're a white man, and we're going to have to get a minority to be the journalist. And I was just like, well, it's my story. I've looked into this crazy thing in Bolivia or whatever it was, the stories I had. I can't just be behind camera and pretend somebody else had done this story and this tokenism and all this stuff. And they were like, we're really sorry. Like, that's just what the BBC are going to take. Channel 4 even worse. And it was gutting at the time because I was on minimum wage at the time. I was trying to make ends meet, trying to see where my next meal would come from, really. It wasn't that bad. It was fine. But it was gutting. And then I did start to look at Louis, who I admire so much. And then he kept telling it in his books. And he's very honest. And he says, they were throwing a series at me. with my name in it.
Yeah.
And I was saying maybe half an hour, and they were going, no, you should do 1 hour, and maybe 2 or 3 episodes. No, 6 episodes. Have them. Have as many as you. Here's Michael Moore. He can be your friend now and help you, and he'll get you into it. Michael Moore. You're just suddenly friends with Michael Moore. His dad is Paul Theroux, the famous writer. His brother is Marcel Theroux, the documentary maker. His cousin is Justin Theroux.
I mean, it is connections.
Jennifer Aniston's ex-husband,
Right.
Justin Theroux.
It is hugely connections.
So it's hard, you know, and it was hard in that moment not to look at his success and want some of it and to feel a little bit bitter, because I just was trying to make ends meet. But, you know, and also because of the Louis of this world and the Paxmans and the Clarksons and all of that, that's part of why there was a reaction against white men on TV, because those guys got in at a time when that was allowed, and so there was so many, and then the younger batch couldn't be white men.
The thing is, I don't know enough about Louis Theroux. I saw an interview with him on the what was it? It's CEO, the CEO's interview.
Diary of Stephen Bartlett.
Yes, that's right. And I thought there were moments there where I got a little glimpse of the Louis behind the curtain, and I didn't like it.
Really?
There was something that I didn't like, especially when he was talking about his ex-wife and what his ex-wife had to say about him, and which, you know, I mean, we've all been subject to some crazy ex-partners at some stage or another. So, you know, I don't think you can always trust what your ex is necessarily saying about you. But there were just some things that I was uncertain about. And now you've told me they were just throwing these ideas at him. And that is because not only was he extremely well connected, and we know that nepotism rules in media, particularly in TV. Look, Channel 4, they've just had to admit, haven't they, that big new programme, the sort of Swingers Next Door or whatever.
That's right.
It was written by the husband of the commissioning editor. So we know it happened. So there will be a huge element of that. He brought the name with him. But I also think that he never goes too far so that it is destabilising for anybody in any way. And I think that's probably a huge part of it. I would go too far. I mean...
You mean Louis as a presenter?
Yeah, in terms of... I think he pulls back from digging deep on investigations that would unsettle scenarios. And I think Savile was a good example. And again, I am not making any claims about him because I simply don't know. It's just my observations. I felt that the Savile interview left me deeply uncomfortable. I felt that there were two people there who seemed to understand something that the rest of us were just outsiders to, and I was uncomfortable about that. I'm not accusing him of knowing about Savile, but as you say, he must have known something to even be able to have that conversation in the first place. So,
but as you also say, to make those allegations when they might not be true is horrific.
Horrific.
So I do understand why he didn't.
It's very, very difficult. It's very, very difficult. But I am of the belief that you don't get such a huge platform like that if you are upsetting the establishment left, right and centre.
Interesting. How could it wouldn't have worked? It's a good point, because part of my head's going, well, this sounds conspiratorial. And then the other part's going, well, but if the BBC was so in cahoots with Savile, if the royals were so in cahoots, if the politicians, and we know that, there's no way he could have pushed more, even if he did know more.
There you go. You've answered your own question.
I do like Louis.
Yeah. The thing is, when somebody is that sort of high caliber at what they do, they make what they do look really simple. And so everybody thinks they can do it. This is, and that is the reality, because, he's like, he looks like he's almost sloppy, but he's not. It's very, very calculated. He knows exactly what he's doing. He's very intelligent. And so I've always enjoyed watching his shows. But yeah, it's difficult. It's difficult to know who knows what. But Esther Ranson said there was loads that was said in green rooms about him. There was a lot of people who knew about Jimmy Savile and did nothing. Oh, man. Because they were protecting their own. That's what
it is.
Yeah.
You've done a lot of work as well while we're talking about the establishment on Madeleine McCann. So, and you were right there from the beginning on that story. So tell me, I mean, again, very briefly, because some people won't know who Madeleine McCann is.
Madeleine Beth McCann was a 3-year-old child who went missing while on holiday in May 2007 in Portugal. Her family and their friends had gone there for a May holiday. There was 9 adults, a bunch of toddlers, Madeleine and her twin brother and sister. She wasn't a twin, she was the oldest of them. And Madeleine was reported missing on May the 3rd, 2007. And I always say reported missing because we don't know that was exactly when she went missing. And So the case of Madeleine McCann, she's actually the world's most famous missing child. I believe that is one of the biggest contemporary cover-ups that we have to do with the British establishment. Wow. We have Operation Grange, which is the British police investigation run by the Metropolitan Police. We're up to about £14 million now that the British taxpayers have funded for a crime that didn't even happen in this country. When you think that roughly one child goes missing every 5 minutes, obviously many of them return, but that is the statistics of how many children go missing. So why did this one child stand out? Why, within hours of Madeleine's disappearance, was the Daily Telegraph reporting on it? It was on Breakfast TV in the UK. Why? What was it that set Madeleine McCann apart? And we know that Gerry McCann, her father, had done some work for the government. Her parents were doctors. Her mother was an anaesthetist. Her father was a heart surgeon. There were 9 adults in the group. I think 6 or 7 were doctors. They said they were all leaving their children at night while they went to the tapas bar on site. I've been to the scene of crime twice. Wow. Gerry McCann has described it as because obviously they were accused, quite rightly in my opinion, of child neglect. And Gerry McCann said it was no different to them being sat out in their garden in summer. Well, I can assure you I've been to both their home and the scene of crime, and it is completely different. The distance between the tapas bar and apartment 5A, where Madeleine was reported missing from, is immense. I've walked it. It takes a good 6 minutes walk to go around the back of it. I mean, you could probably do it in 2 or 3 if you're walking fast, but if you but it's far enough. So the idea was that they were going back to check these children every 15 to 20 minutes, which is highly debatable. And then when Kate went in at 10 o'clock, that was when she discovered that Madeleine had disappeared. And rather than gather up her twin children who were still there, she ran back to the tapas bar, which immediately alarmed me as a mother, because it's like, so one of your children's been missing, you believe it's been taken by some predator who's come in the window and gone out the window, and you leave your remaining 2 children there? That's really odd. And then the people had said that she'd said things like they've taken her, so that sounded like they knew who it was. There was a great deal of controversy about it. The Portuguese police absolutely believed, and eventually it was archived. They made Kate and Gerry McCann arguido, which is official suspect in Portugal, and they actually believed that Madeleine died in the apartment and that there was a faked abduction. And what happened was, within hours, the British Prime Minister was involved in the case. Tony Blair was the Prime Minister at the time. Who has conversations with parents of missing children when they're Prime Ministers? Both Tony Blair was involved and Gordon Brown, who replaced Tony Blair in about a month and a half. He was due to take over, and that's when he took over. And I am in no doubt whatsoever that the continuation of one Prime Minister and one Home Secretary after another refunding Operation Grange is simply to stop the truth coming out. At the start of Operation Grange, which was around 2013, 2014, the investigating officer announced at the start of the investigation that neither the parents or the friends who were there were part of the investigation. Now, as somebody who's worked extensively with the forensic examiners and people involved with child abduction, the first place you look is the adults who were there or who know the child. That is absolutely the first place. For the British investigation to rule them out from the get-go was absolutely outrageous. So I'm in no doubt. And the reason people are fascinated by the Madeleine McCann story, because on our gut instinct, we know it doesn't add up. These are doctors. What were they doing apparently leaving children alone? And bear this in mind. They have to say, this is a theory that some people have, they have to say they were leaving the children alone. Otherwise, abduction wouldn't have been possible. So is it possible that something happened to Madeleine that was then covered up?
Shall I do some devil's advocating?
Go for it.
As somebody who doesn't know very much about the case, admittedly. But firstly, I mean, people did leave their kids a bit more than, I mean, now
oh, yes, so much. Very middle class thing to do.
Was it? Yes.
It's a middle class thing to do.
And they were middle class. A lot of press they got was because they were middle class doctors and things.
Yes.
And, you know, and as awful as that is, that's people are more interested, or the newspapers are more interested. And she was also particularly cute or whatever as a kid. She had a thing in her eye that made her quite identifiable, so it captured the imagination.
Yeah.
Holidays and things, it's like in the newspapers, it is a big deal when people are on holidays. There's even stories about airports and planes get like top billing now in newspapers. People love holiday stories.
Yes.
And then the other issue is, And I found this with Amanda Knox as well. I interviewed Amanda Knox, who was the woman accused.
Wow, I know Amanda Knox is. Never interviewed her.
Well, I'm just saying in case people don't.
I must check that out.
Yeah, I interviewed her. That was a while ago. And also I was on her podcast as well to talk about various things. So that was great fun. And she's lovely. Or is she? So
Is she? Right.
But this is the thing with Amanda Knox. I sided with her, but obviously I wasn't there. You know, I don't know enough about it. But the way I'm thinking right now is I would rather, because she's not out there like doing repeated, murdering, I would rather side with caution, I suppose, than, because if she did go to prison for 4 years for something that Amanda Knox did not do, that is a horror beyond anything I will ever have to experience. So to then start commenting on YouTube, you're a murderer, and all these things, I have to be damn sure.
Yes.
I have to be damn sure. Otherwise, I can just shut up, and that's not hurting anyone.
Yes.
And I felt with Madeleine, if Madeleine, if there is a cover up, that's awful, but it's not happening. The McCann, and I don't know what I'm saying exactly, but the McCanns aren't out there.
I take your point.
Yeah.
I completely take your point. And I think a lot of people in the media have felt like that. Although, if you remember, the initial response was much more probing and investigative around the story until there was the huge lawsuit from the McCanns and their friends. And the Daily Express were forced to do an unprecedented front page apology, and that completely silenced everybody. Yeah. I am damn sure that Madeleine McCann was not abducted.
Wow. What do you think happened then?
I tend to agree with the Portuguese police. The Portuguese police believed that what was possibly, they believed that she died in the apartment, first of all. Very high-ranking cadaver and blood dogs were sent into the apartment. And these were not regulars. These belonged to Martin Grime, who was a top-of-the-range man from, I think, North Yorkshire Police, who has been used in testimonies in the state, and people have been convicted without bodies being found based on the testimony of him and his work. So it was his dogs that went in. And these dogs, they alerted to blood spats behind the sofa, with a high DNA allele count that was related, it would appear, to Madeleine. There was a problem with the forensic science services. There were problems with the DNA, the issues and everything. But these dogs alerted only in the apartment where Madeleine was reported missing, in a hire car that McCann's hired after Madeleine was reported missing, in the further holiday home that they were moved to when apartment 5A was made a crime scene. Madeleine's cuddly toy and a key fob belonging to the McCanns. These dogs were also sent to the apartments of all the other people who were on the holiday and didn't alert once. So those dogs only alerted in the apartment where Madeleine went missing. And what I think is highly possible that happened, because I will say what the Portuguese police believe. The Portuguese police believe that it's highly likely that when Jerry McCann came in around 9:15 and he went out the apartment and he was having a conversation with a BBC producer outside the window who was also on holiday, and Madeleine woke up, possibly in a daze because she might have been having some sort of, I don't know, Calpol or whatever, woke up in a daze, got up on the back of the sofa, looked out of the window, fell off down the back of the sofa, cracked her head open on the stone floor. And that is what is believed happened. And that was the case that was archived by the Portuguese police. And with the archiving of that, Kate and Jerry McCann no longer were arguidos, but Kate and Jerry McCann, and the Supreme Court said this, Kate and Jerry McCann have not been cleared.
So if they had just called the police and said, with just the worst accidents just happened, our kid fell off the sofa.
But who knows how any of us would react in a situation like that? They had their careers, all of them were, the vast majority of them were doctors, so
no one would have believed them and said,
right,
hit her.
Right. But there's so much evidence, which probably I have time to go into. But what I would say is to anybody, check out the Portuguese police files, which are online. Look at the testimony of the Smith family, who say on that night, they say around that time where the time that Madeleine was reported missing, they claim that they saw a man carrying a small child going down towards the sea, and they claim that they are 60 to 80% certain that that was Jerry McCann. Wow. And this is the stuff you don't see in the press, but this is the stuff why there's so much about this case, including the fact that Jerry changed his witness statement. He gave a witness statement the day after on the 4th of May, and he gave another one on the 10th. And between those dates, he changed how he accessed the apartment, how he got into the apartment. So it's things like that that are interesting to me, because once you start to get those discrepancies and once they build up, and these aren't just one or two discrepancies in this case, I can go on forever. We could have a 7-hour conversation. I can still be telling you about discrepancies.
Well, I'll have to get you back on,
Yeah.
and also for people to go and check out your channel. I mean, where do you want to send people?
Yeah, I'd love people to watch my 2 documentaries. The first one is The McCanns and the Police, and that's about all of the police resources, unprecedented police resources that have been put into finding Madeleine. And the second one is Public Relations and Saving Reputations, and that talks about the huge private fund that Kate and Jerry had access to, and of which they used to pay some of their mortgage payments, and which they also use to acquire the absolute top of the top image consultants, public relations. So that parents of missing children generally don't need image consultants and public relations or legal funds.
Make sure to follow Sonia's links. They're down below, and it's all fascinating. I've had a look myself, so go and check that out. And also, while you're here, watch one of these videos about my other heretics. I hope you keep enjoying it.